Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Day 1 of testing in Bahrain is over and an ominous sign for the rest of the grid. Given Max Verstappen's performance today in the RB20, there was a genuine feeling around the grid and from Red Bull themselves, they may have created another masterpiece here, and a masterpiece capable of going even one step further and being possibly even more dominant than last year's RB19. The numbers today are honestly kind of mind-blowing and go even beyond what the headline figures say. Lots to dive into today. Very much into your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate. Lots of updates as well happening today on the track. Firstly, really, from Williams, opting to design its own gearbox and its own rear suspension design. So Mercedes have moved towards the Red Bull pushrod rear suspension configuration that every team has done now, apart from Ferrari. They've stuck with a pull rod design, therefore so have Haas. But Aston Martin have taken the gearbox and the new suspension from Mercedes. But Mercedes themselves are not sending that to Williams, it seems, with the pushrod rear suspension and gearbox not going to Williams. They've designed their own stuff. They didn't exactly have a great day today, Williams, to be fair. There were some issues for Albon, there were some issues for Sargent, we shall discuss when the time comes here over the coming minutes. This was also noted on the Mercedes that they've got this little inlet on the front of the nose here. Red Bull have something similar as well. Possibly this is cooling related, but lots to mention on that here in a second. We've got to talk though about the RB20 because there was lots of speculation from the launch as to exactly what the configuration of the sidepod inlet was going to be. Craig Scarborough theorised that what we see is actually what is in reality, and that is what we have here. So this looks almost like a shark, you know, this looks like the mouth of a shark. Last year they had the underbite design. This year they've gone very much for an overbite design, and well, you guys can see the main sidepod inlet here in the position it's expected to be. Now, Adrian Newey is a big fan, if where possible, let's say, to reduce the cooling, reduce the radiation of the car to maximize performance. Maybe there's been history, you know, with him when he designed McLarens back in the day. That's not always gone to plan, and sometimes the car blows up, but that hasn't been the case so far, and they do have extra cooling with what seems to be an S-duct. Whether this kind of goes into the side pod, whether this has like an S-duct outlet further up the car, bit of a debate, but yeah, nobody else is doing anything quite like this, with two different inlets to the side pod seemingly in pretty much the same position. So I mean, that's pretty crazy. There's also this to note. So if you look from the rear of the car, or like from the front towards the rear, these are the cannons, or whatever you want to say, the shoulders of the car that effectively Red Bull have taken from last year's Mercedes W14, but they have an inlet on them which we have not seen anybody else deploy. So like, it's no secret that Red Bull have gone incredibly aggressive with this year's design, bringing so many new ideas to the table, and this is the comparison of last year's RB19 to this year's RB20, and basically everything you see from the sidepod inlet to the rear of the car to the front suspension, there all seems to have been some changes, and that's got to be pretty scary to the competition given the fact that this car on the left hand side won 21 of 22 races last season, and there is a genuine feeling that this year's car on the right hand side might be able to even go one better than that. Red Bull do, however, have the Christian Horner situation to deal with. There were plenty of images actually going around today of Horner chatting with Marco, and this is actually Pierre Wache of their technical department, and there are a few images where Horner looked somewhat concerned, and there were some big rumours actually emerging today from the Finnish media. So this is interesting in and of itself, just because we haven't seen much really come out of the Finnish media and Viaplay and stuff like this, but that's what happened today, and their pit lane reporter Murphy Kallion, and just to mention here in the article it says he and it says himself. I think in Finnish they don't really have like the gendered pronouns or whatever, so that's kind of what's going on there. So you guys can see that it talks about the employee and then it refers to the employee as himself, but that should of course be herself, just the translation related stuff. But just making sure this is fully on screen, on the reporting it was said that the decision has been made that Horner will go, and apparently, you know, she's talked to some people behind the scenes that have confirmed that is now a done deal apparently, and it's only a matter of time until details are filed and become public. So supposedly by next Wednesday there might be an announcement on this on the 28th, and yeah, apparently that's the rumour, that Horner is basically dusted. It's a matter of time. If this is the case, kind of strange to me that he's still there and just chilling out in the paddock really with the team. if the decision has apparently been made that Horner's time with the team is going to swiftly come to an end, which feels like the only, or certainly the most likely resolution given what's happened over the last couple of weeks. And of course, Toto Wolff was very quick to give his assessment on the matter. And in the immediate term, how much difference is this going to make for the team? Probably not a massive amount, but in the long run, of course, those are the conversations. But for now, the car is still the car, and the car has been generated behind the scenes over the last several months, and it seems, well, another emphatic piece of Newey engineering and for the rest of the guys as well. So few key events really of the testing day today. There was also a bit of on-track action. Verstappen not only set the fastest lap time today, set the fastest long-run pace today, set the most laps of the day, he also completed the first overtake of the season because he managed to overtake Charles Leclerc here. They had a bit of a back and forth on track, shall we say. Also, Mercedes had some sort of issue with their car. Well, there was some debate on this. There was rumours they had some sort of issue with their hybrid system, but they said, no, we were just doing some checks and just doing standard stuff, working on the setup and all this, and then we sent Russell back out again. So, it was only Russell today for Mercedes, it was only Verstappen today for Red Bull. And then Mercedes went on to say, well, we're not really so worried about, getting in the laps, it's more about just understanding things. But to be fair, by the end of the day, they had Russell doing a lot of laps. So you might read into that Mercedes were having some issues, but they didn't really want to say publicly exactly what was going on there. This is Logan Sargent as well, spinning off going into turn 10, and he had a bit of a rough time. And actually, I think there was an issue with the Williams car that they had to bring their session to an end slightly earlier than planned. Albon in the morning as well apparently ran out of fuel. There were some issues with that car as well. Now, Toto Wolff, of course, looking like this in the press conference over the midday break, and he didn't look especially happy, did he? Let's be honest. And there's multiple reasons why he might have looked like this. Might just be a bad shot, but he doesn't look especially pleased. What he does say, however, is that they are confident, or at least more confident in the W15 so far than what they saw previously. Of course, last year they knew from testing that W14 wasn't really going to work, and he was on the phone apparently to James Allison day one to get him back in the team as their technical director, of course. But look, Toto says there's a positive atmosphere. Basically, last year the car was busy for the drivers, difficult for us to understand. This year we tried to solve those problems. We should have a platform that's easier to develop. Now, we have a car that's more in line with the trend set by Red Bull. We need to see if it works. Difficult to say at lunchtime because they don't have too many laps yet, but the first reaction from the drivers is encouraging. They can work with it. So, not an immense amount of optimism, but even if the new Mercedes is good, it's going to take some sort of mistake from Red Bull for them to lose this championship, especially on the evidence that we have seen today. Now, you might argue that the dominance we saw from Verstappen today is mainly just because Red Bull know they've got a great car, they've got so much confidence, and therefore they're just putting everything on the table. They're not holding anything back, they're not sandbagging, as we have seen teams such as Mercedes do in the past, and they've got a lot of strength and they don't necessarily want to show their whole hands. It seems Red Bull are very much keen to show everybody what they've got on the table here, and even Jeff Dodds, a CEO of Formula E, said the following today: the F1 title is 99% done. Max could put the trophy in his cabinet right now. If he doesn't win it, we will give, as Formula E, 250 grand to the driver who does, to a charity of their choice. Which is an interesting thing to say, because it simultaneously says we have 250 grand to give to charity, but we're almost certainly not going to be doing it because Max is probably going to win the title. But I guess really what he's trying to say is here, F1 is no point watching it, watch Formula E, because it's not a foregone conclusion. And maybe he's right to make that type of statement, because AMUS say that sources behind the scenes in the paddock say, and I think this is pretty much known, they could have developed their car from the RB19 into an evolution of it. They didn't do that. They effectively revolutionized their car, and Red Bull doesn't just want to win, they want to continue dominating, and it seems they might have created a car that's capable of doing that. Even this is what Adrian Newey says. This I thought was immensely ominous. We knew that everyone else was going to copy our car from last year. If we had only focused on further development, we would have been vulnerable. So, how about that? We would have been vulnerable had we have, focused on further development, but instead they have revolutionized parts of their car, brought in so many new ideas, and the implication from Newey is that we are not vulnerable anymore, like completely invulnerable, and nobody is going to be able to come anywhere close. So this was the first session in the morning. Verstappen here with a 1:32.5 at the time, 7 tenths ahead of Leclerc in P2. Now, testing times don't generally matter that much. But they mean something for sure. And when you look at the evidence of what the car was doing, the eye test of the car, plus the lap times, plus the long run data, you can start to get a picture of what exactly is going on here. And Verstappen was setting the pace. By the way, last year's best day one time, I believe, was a 1:32.8. So Verstappen was already about 3/10 up on that last year. And I think his time that he set at the end of the day was very nearly the fastest time of last year's test. But during the early afternoon, there was some optimism from other teams because Carlos Sainz put a time in that was very close to Verstappen's time. And then Lando Norris actually went fastest very briefly with a 1:32.4. I always think, though, people overestimate when they look at testing and practice the single lap pace. What's really more important is what is the long run pace? What does the race data look like? And we'll have a look at some of that in a second, because if you guys want a competitive season, these numbers are pretty concerning. So Verstappen then decided, all right, you've had your fun, guys, and I'm just going to pump in a lap that's 8/10 faster than anybody else could manage on the same compound. So Norris had just done some fast laps, Sainz had just done some fast laps and put in some decent times. Verstappen then just moved the goalposts completely into the 1:31s, and nobody else was able to get anywhere close to this kind of lap time. Like, absolutely absurd. The car looks so scary. Even just looking at it from the front on, it looks so scary. And maybe the car isn't so pretty compared to the last couple of years' cars, but boy, does it seem to be effective. So maybe you can argue that Red Bull are just so confident that whatever, let's just do glory runs, because why not? Let's just strike fear into the heart of the opposition. We've seen it before that maybe teams further down the grid, they do glory runs in practice or in testing, just maybe to get their sponsors some airtime or whatever. And maybe that's what's going on with Red Bull, or maybe this car's just that good, because at the start of the day, the Red Bull didn't look super dialed in, a bit more understeer than maybe it was expected. The car seemed to be struggling a little bit more than we might have usually seen, but it didn't take long for Red Bull to get things locked in. And if they've understood this car immediately as of day one, and their simulation data has correlated perfectly to what they find on track, just good luck to anybody else managing this over the next couple of years. And apparently there's even some feeling in the paddock that it's basically a done deal. Verstappen is going to win next two championships this year and next year, and there's nothing that anybody is really going to be able to do about it. And that is the feeling that I get of what Red Bull think as well, because this was GP here, right? Of course, Giampiero Lambiase, Max's race engineer. Immediately after this happens, this was his facial expression. I think he's nodding here at Adrian Newey as well. This is immediately after Max went 8/10 clear, and he seemed to be looking at Newey and saying, yep, yeah, you're right. This is basically a done deal, right? So this I thought was scary in and of itself enough. But what I thought was even more interesting really is the long run pace, right? Because that's what really tells. Last year, Red Bull were pretty even keel with Ferrari, generally speaking, in qualifying performance. But the race pace was 5/10 clear, if not sometimes more. AMUS reported that this is very early in the day, that Verstappen's long runs were, well, as they say, that's not a good sign in terms of for the competition of the championship. Verstappen completes the long run like clockwork with times that others can only dream of. Ocon is on average 2.5 seconds slower. And look, the Alpine, by the way, is so ugly. I can't even believe they've put that livery on their car. But let's have a look at some of these race simulation numbers, because this, for example, was Russell at the end of the day on the C2 tyre. So the C1 is the hardest compound, C2 second hardest, C3, of course, is the medium that most people were using. And, talk was that the Mercedes is looking pretty decent, looked okay, most of the cars looked okay. But these were the sort of numbers that you're seeing here in the long run stints. Now, we don't know fuel level and stuff like that. The belief is that probably these were on very high fuel loads. But let's have a look at these numbers, right? So this is Russell's times, and this is pretty much what you might expect and what most teams were pretty much doing today. So, 138s, 138 mids, 138 highs on the C3. His C2 runs were like this, 137s, high 137s, low 138s, and the C1 run was, 135, 136. So this was actually pretty impressive, to be fair, given the fact that I believe all of these were probably on the higher fuel loads. So makes sense, I guess, that the harder compound over several laps will be slightly quicker because you've got to protect the tyres more on the weaker compounds. But still, it varies a lot, right? You've got to understand that the numbers vary quite significantly. But, I mean, okay, those are some of the numbers. Let's see what Verstappen was doing and what other guys were doing. So these were Russell's C2 times, for example, 137s, 138s, in that kind of ballpark. These were Norris's numbers as well on the C3, so 137 mid, something like that on the stints that they did. This is what Verstappen was doing on the C3. So let's not forget Russell 138s, Norris 137s. Verstappen was doing a 136 mid. And, you know, this was about the time where he was 2 seconds a lap quicker than most other guys on track at the same time. And you can go into the reasons why, and we don't know fuel loads and stuff like this, but I mean, you gotta say, these are Verstappen's times on the C1. 136, 135, 135, 135. Like, that's basically a second quicker than what Russell was doing, right? So these are the numbers that you really want to look at if you're trying to get a picture of how good this car is. And this was his final run of the day, actually, on the C3s, and he was down into the 134s. This is when he did his fastest lap of the day as well. So he put in some laps in the 131s to try and, you know, break the record of the day, and then went on those set of tyres to do some consistent 134s every single lap, which was faster than anybody else could do by, you know, we're talking like a second, if not more than a second. So in and among all of this going on, Verstappen set the fastest lap time. He broke his own time as well. He went purple, and then actually went yellow sector 3. And I'm pretty sure that the RB, maybe the, well, basically Ricciardo's lap was the closest to Verstappen on that final sector. But he ended the day 1.1 seconds up on Lando Norris in P2. And as I said, last year's best time on day one was like a 1:32.8. So we're talking a second and a half. This lap time for Verstappen, I think, would have put him P11 on last year's grid, qualifying grid, by the way. So that kind of shows where the Red Bull is right now. And, you know, obviously the track is only getting more rubbered in. It's only right at the start of the weekends or the start of testing. And we're talking about qualifying in a week and a half's time. So, yeah, ominous early signs of Red Bull. I can almost already hear the Dutch national anthem playing in my ears right now. And there does seem to be a general feeling that Red Bull have, you know, nailed it, right? From Red Bull internally and also from other teams, that realistically speaking, the target that Red Bull set last year is something that they are looking to try and one up and top. So, you know, quite often in testing, we see some sort of intrigue, you know, maybe a team that's expected to be good won't be so good. But I think today was kind of ridiculous in some sense that in basically every single category, Red Bull and Verstappen dominated all of the timesheets, all of the numbers, and really have laid down a marker of what other teams have to stop because, you know, they talk about dominance. They're not just here to dominate all 24 races this season. Apparently they're here to dominate testing as well, to dominate the amount of lap times, you know, the amount of laps completed because Verstappen did the most today, and, you know, just completely take over the sport if they haven't done that enough already. So kind of absurd, to be honest. And according to Will Buxton, this was his reading of the day's running, and he reckons that it's Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari and Aston, RB as potentially the 5th best team, Mercedes in 6th, and Alpine, Sauber, Williams, Haas. So, you know, obviously massive caveats to take here. Things will very much change over time, but things are unlikely to change, you've got to imagine, right to the top of these rankings. So these were the overall season standings for day one. Obviously, I'll keep you guys updated tomorrow as to if anything changes going forward. But hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.